Hello there, it's Steve here in Sydney. I'm the lead notice website, truebluehealer.com. What I'd like to talk to today is the alarming rise. It's on the Daily Telegraph headlines today. The alarming rise in candidates for transgender surgery being selected by school teachers. They call in a kind of one-woman emergency SWAT team, and the woman is in air quotes because I think she's transgender, and for 20 years she's got a degree in psychology or something, and she's been advising just about everyone she meets that they should all get a sex change operation and be booked in for hormonal reassignment when they're 6, 7, 8 and 9 years old, you see. So they never actually grow up. They have the Peter Pan problem, never growing up. And what's inevitably withheld from these children, I've read a number of articles about Dr. Elizabeth Riley, about her, and she advocates this and that, and every kind of illness or dysfunction that we have, she calls it an orientation, which is a bit of a joke, really. But I know one thing they leave out, which is, well, if you get transgender surgery, it's highly likely you most probably will commit suicide. They don't hammer that message home at all to the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids who were selected by a teacher because they said something like, I feel like two spirits. Now, if you say something like that, the teacher can seize upon it and call in this Dr. Elizabeth Riley and have the child assigned for gender surgery. Now, there's a problem with that, because I know under 12 children have minds like tape recorders, and they often just say things because it's like an advertising jingle they've heard. So I feel like Two Spirits could be the name of a song that the teacher hasn't heard yet. And the person could be singing it or saying the poetry out loud that's in their head, implanted by a radio station. You really don't know. There's almost certainly a song about that somewhere. But it's been over-interpreted by Marxist school teachers, and the queue is rising for transgender surgery, despite the fact that it doesn't cure so-called gender dysphoria, and it actually leads to a very high rate of suicide. So what I am demanding is it's some honesty from the LGBT never-ending alphabet soup people, and say, let's add S to LGBT for suicide. And of course, then they can say, well, that's just an orientation, isn't it? Suicide. It's just another orientation. When you think about it, these dismissal phrases, it's just an orientation, can be applied to anything. Genocide. Are we going to have G in there too? Oh, genocide's just an orientation. You know, it's all I've ever thought about since I was small. I just go up to do it, and society doesn't understand me, but it's my orientation. Is there anything you can't misdescribe as an orientation to legalise it and normalise it? I would say it's a used car salesman's trick. Another word that she uses, this Dr. Elizabeth Riley, this transgender advocate, is natural. She says all these people suffering gender dysphoria are just natural, and it's always been like that since the 1800s, she says. Probably not. I've read Dr. Wallach, who's an expert. He invented with Dr. Bruce Lepton, he invented a science called epigenetics. And Dr. Wallach says homosexuality, gender confusion, that sort of thing, is actually due to a selenium deficiency in the pregnant mother at a critical time during gender formation. And that can cause hormonal excess or lack of. So then it's natural. Well, all things are natural, aren't they? It's a meaningless phrase like cool and groovy. It doesn't make it all right to have a natural disease, does it? Is it okay? Is that disease your orientation? I get so weary of reading this in the media. Now, what's causing this worldwide, what can I say, embrace of liberalism, left-wing thinking, and living in fairyland where you run away from the harsh reality of life and live in fairyland? It's been called the Peter Pan syndrome. I'll link an article for you on that. But there's a fellow called Dr. Gundy, who's got an explanation for it. And it's not natural at all, this gender dysphoria, which is being reported by teachers looking for it in their students. It may be due to the 1.7 million tonnes of glyphosate weed killer, that's Roundup, that's in our food chain, and the amount of weed killer dumped is just going up and up and up. Now, Dr. Gundry reports in a riveting lecture that information indicates neuron counts, it's counting nerve cells, indicates that there's more neurons in our gut than our spines. And a lot of hormones that our number 2 brain depends on are actually generated by foreign bacteria that live in us beneficially. So we depend on bacteria to produce serotonin, a number of neurotransmitters, and likely some other critical chemicals we haven't discovered yet of some interest. It may even affect dementia, because the so-called enemy that causes dementia is amyloid plaques, and they have been discovered in our guts. So they could actually come from our guts, be formed by the wrong bacteria in our guts. We don't know. But it doesn't help when Monsanto come along and repeatedly kill off our bacteria, our specialist bacteria that produce so many brain hormones and neurotransmitters which link all the cells, you see. So maybe that's why we have so much depression and everybody on Prozac and that sort of thing these days, and so much gender dysphoria, confusion, not knowing the basics about what is real and what is not, and running away from reality, which in itself is a mild form of autism, that you prefer to live in fairyland. So he puts forward a riveting case, which is a potential explanation for what Dr. Elizabeth Riley in Sydney newspapers is just calling orientation, and it's purely natural. But I don't think us eating glyphosate in our food, in breakfast cereals, in wheat crops, bread, everything we eat, I don't think that's natural, although you can. I don't think it's the right thing to do. Maybe we should get away from the word natural altogether. In case you don't know, Monsanto has always claimed that glyphosate has always been safe because it only affects plant creatures with so-called shikimate pathway. Okay, that's how it kills weeds and stuff in 3 weeks. The problem is that all our gut bacteria, our human cells are not directly affected by glyphosate, as far as we know, but our gut bacteria, many of them do have the shikimate pathway. So we've got glyphosate in our diet, killing off our beneficial bacteria that we depend on for dear life and our very grasp of reality. So it's being undermined, and it may explain this Peter Pan syndrome that's talked about. I found that article at Gatestone. I've long thought this is a problem, that it's something everyone's eating in their youth, to grow up and basically never grow up, and still think that everything should be fair like it was at school and that sort of thing, and not have the maturity to just link a few evidence dots together to form your own personal picture, your own personal metaphors, just to keep mouthing all the childish tape-recorded ideas you've heard at school and believing everything you hear. The total lack of skepticism in left-wing young people today is bordering on the bizarre, because there's a recent article in the newspaper here that American and Australian children basically, like 40% of them are communists. They think everything should be fair like it was at school, and the entire society can run like that. Whereas in truth, the opposite is true. That level of equality that has been like government enforced has killed hundreds of millions of people in the last century, but kids today don't read books and don't want to know about history. In fact, as far as I can tell, society depends on inequality to function. There's a big mix of inequality. I accept that as natural, like gut flora. It is that way. So it's just from many, many decades of observation of societal behaviours. So while Dr. Elizabeth Riley is diagnosing seemingly hundreds of school kids that they need life-changing one-way operation that can never be repeated that leads to suicide to fix a disorder, she's diagnosing simply with verbal responses. And we all know that counsellors can put words in children's mouths. We've had, you feel anxious, you really feel anxious, you're really concerned when you go near that house. Are you really? Well, you're actually covering up, you're unconsciously covering up the fact that you were molested when you were staying there, you see. And you can create that picture in a child's mind, a gullible child that tape records everything they hear, because they don't yet have skepticism, which doesn't come until you're about 12, 13, when maturation hormones commence their job, re-architecting your number 2 brain up here. Okay, that's called maturation, and it takes seemingly till you're about 25, 26 that you finally get impulse control. We're not reaching that anymore. A lot of people are staying in the Peter Pan slot, so to speak, and never growing up. We've got what we call conservatives. We've got people who've had their daughter killed defending the killers. I'm wondering if this is just environmental poisoning. I'll get the link for you. There's a terrible article where a man's been torn to pieces, reputation-wise, for embracing the rights of illegal immigrants to kill his daughter, that sort of thing. I think I've stretched it a bit too far there, but it's an appalling thing that the father doesn't hold any grief against anybody else, that he's accepting on the sacrifice of political correctness, on the altar of political correctness. He's sacrificing his own daughter, and he's accusing other people of running political agendas around his daughter's death. Yet he seems to be doing that very thing himself. So I'm wondering if a lifetime of glyphosate will affect people's thought processes. Mercifully, something good's coming on Sunday, which is the Swedish election. I'm hoping that the anti-immigration party gets a dominating position, possibly getting the most number of votes, and is finally able to do something about stopping the immigration experiment into Sweden. Apparently, Swedish people have been found to be a little bit narrow-minded. They've let 1.5 million people in, or something, a huge number, into Sweden of these refugees, and the refugees respond to this kindness, giving them refuge, by throwing grenades at Swedish people. Now, that's just a cultural thing, and it's just an orientation. Have you got that, right? You have to accept grenades, as that's their way of saying thank you, right? You understand how twisted Marxist reasoning can be? It can make a positive out of any negative. So that's the nonsense, the utter nonsense of Marxist thinking that finds such shallow ground in young people today. Sweden seems to have a big dose of this, but I think they're slowly growing out of it as more and more grenades are thrown at them. So maybe we need more grenades. They get them from Yugoslavia, and so far the number of grenades thrown is small because they don't have enough money to buy artillery. Right? They're on welfare. Swedish welfare doesn't buy artillery, right? So it's low-level violence, grenades only in shopping centres, okay? So I'm hoping that enough Swedish people wake up and start voting for common sense parties. And by the way, I don't think common sense is left or right wing. I think common sense stands on its own merit. And I think we should stop politically theming every breath we take and every word that's spoken. It's gone insane. We've all become full-time politicians. It's absolutely crazy, and common sense is making a comeback all over the Western world, in the Visegrad states, even in Venezuela, and hopefully Sweden on Sunday. So look up the Swedish election results and hope they make a substantial swing toward common sense nationalism, which seems to be the most natural way. Can I use that phrase? I'll use it in air quotes. How about that? We are designed to live, because we've been gene pools in separated nation states for so long that we actually identify countries with the race of people living there, don't we? So we have things like Baluchistan, which is named after the Baluchi tribe. Yeah, so lots and lots of countries like that in Africa are named after the ethnic group that live there. So it's a natural thing. Here I go doing it again. It's a normal thing, an accepted thing to name a country after its inhabitants because they belong there, they live there, they've been there for thousands of years. That common sense is slowly making a comeback. If you watch Dr. Steve Turley, he does 2 videos a day telling you about political events and electoral events as the common sense makes a big comeback. And even in Germany, that's happening. The globalists are on the run, but I think Sweden might be the first country to use military force to get these people put into FEMA camps and left there until they can be deported. The problem being you can't deport people to countries that won't take their citizens back. On the other hand, the refugees may not tell you where they ever came from. So what do you do with them? Well, you put them in FEMA camps, and they could become a new, commonly seen piece of architecture in Europe. It may be the only way Europe can survive. That's the only way to handle the refugee problem if you can't deport people. Or else you need somewhere else to put them, like one of the Canary Islands, maybe a Mediterranean island, something like that. North African states have been asked, could we rent a part of, say, Morocco and put 1 million African migrants there and Middle Eastern migrants? And the answers come back, no way. There's no North African state wants to have a foreign state created within itself, paid for by the EU. It's not going to happen. So FEMA camps seem to be the most likely option. One more thing I will reiterate, and that is that I don't see how this society tolerates our ultra-safe work area classrooms with small children in it, with fireproof doors. We have whiteboards that don't produce chalk, so the teachers don't get lung diseases from chalk dust. We have fire alarms, emergency drills. We have non-slip floors. We have fireproof doors. And in this ultra-safe work area for school teachers and children, we are running a suicide cult called Transexualism. Now, I just can't see, this is the lunatic nonsense of Marxism. I really think this issue should be raised, but I'm a nobody listens to me, yet it seems to me a wonderful talking point that the media could grab hold of. I don't know how to bring it to the attention of newspapers, because they all write to certain agendas, and we have a lot of people in our Sydney newspapers who are blatantly Marxist writing our columns. So we're stuck with that. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Steve here in Sydney.